So let me tell you a story. It's about a day when India's economy was hit by a massive shock from the outside. But at the very same time, something was happening on the inside, a quiet, deliberate reset of the country's business rules. Let's get right into it.
All right, let's set the scene. The date is March 23rd, 2026. And for anyone watching the markets, it was just a day of pure, unadulterated panic. The whole system seemed to be in a freefall.
India's main stock market index, the Sensex, just absolutely tanked. It dropped over 1,800 points in a single day. And to give you some context, that was one of the worst single-day drops anyone had seen in a long, long time.
So what was fueling this fire? Well, it was a massive exit of cash. Foreign investors yanked a staggering 88,000 crore rupees out of the market. That's more than 10 billion US dollars pulled out in March alone. Just poof, gone. The trigger for all this chaos was external. A conflict flaring up in West Asia sent these huge shockwaves through the global economy, and oil prices went through the roof. This in turn just hammered the Indian rupee, pushing it to a record low. But here's where the story gets really interesting. While all the headlines were screaming about this crisis, something much more fundamental, much quieter was happening behind the scenes. And this is what we're calling the dual shock. Which leads you to ask the big question, right? Was this just a day of random chaos? Or was there actually a long-term strategic reset happening right under the surface of all that noise? Okay, so here's the first piece of the puzzle. On that exact same day, March 23rd, while the markets were bleeding, the Indian government quietly introduced a massive overhaul of its corporate laws in Parliament. The whole philosophy behind this bill was a complete 180. The goal was to shift India's business environment away from the system of fear, one that basically criminalized minor mistakes, and move towards something that actually encourages growth and makes life simpler. And what's really interesting is how these changes all work together. See, by decriminalizing small slip-ups, you take away that fear factor for entrepreneurs, which encourages them to take risks. Relaxing rules on things like share buybacks gives companies more options to manage their cash, especially when times get tough. And yeah, regulators get more power to go after the big stuff, but the overall message is pretty clear. Let's focus on growing, not just on avoiding tiny penalties. Of course, not everyone was on board. There was criticism. Some opposition members argued that the bill handed over way too much power to regulators to make up the rules as they go, kind of bypassing Parliament. It's the classic debate, right? Do you want speed and flexibility, or do you want detailed democratic oversight? So that was the first big reset. Now for the second one. At the same time, India was completely rethinking its rules for foreign direct investment, or FDI, especially when it came from its neighbors. Now, to really get why this is a big deal, you have to look at the old rule. It was called Press Note 3, and it came out back in 2020. It was basically a defensive move that said any investment, no matter how tiny, from a company with links to a neighboring country needed a thumbs up from the government. The main idea was to stop hostile takeovers during the pandemic. And boy, did that rule have an impact. Just look at this. Before the rule, investment from China and Hong Kong was about 2% of India's total FDI. After the rule, it fell off a cliff, down to just 0.25%. The capital tap was basically shut off. So, fast forward to 2026, and the government brings in a much smarter risk-based system. And the magic number here is 10%. This means a huge global fund that has, say, a 5% investor from China can now invest automatically in an Indian company. This is a game changer because it unlocks this massive pool of global capital that was pretty much stuck on the sidelines. And this wasn't random, it was super strategic. The government also created a 60-day fast-track lane for investment into these very specific, very critical manufacturing sectors. The goal is crystal clear. Let's use targeted foreign cash and technology to build up India's own supply chains in areas that really matter. It's a direct play to become more self-reliant. Okay, so we've got corporate law, we've got foreign investment. What's the third part of this internal reset? Well, it happened deep inside the banking system, and it's all about how big deals get funded in India. This was a truly landmark move by the Reserve Bank of India. For the very first time, big Indian banks were given the green light to directly finance huge corporate takeovers. I mean, for decades, if an Indian company wanted to buy another one, they had to go get money from foreign banks. This change keeps that business right here in India and helps create massive Indian companies that can compete globally. And this wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Yeah.
You had the market regulator, SEBI, making it easier for companies to go public, and they were cutting the red tape for stockbrokers. When you look at it all together, these weren't just small tweaks. It was a big, coordinated push to make the whole financial system more dynamic and more efficient.
So let's step back for a second and look at the big picture here. What does all of this actually mean when you put it all together? And this brings us right back to our core theme, the dual shock. You had the external shock, the geopolitical crisis, which was loud, scary, and immediate. But underneath all that, you had this quiet internal reset, the deliberate foundational changes to corporate law, FDI, and banking, all designed to build a stronger economy for the long haul. Which leaves us with one final big question to chew on. We live in an age of constant global crises, right? The real question for India, and really for any country, is this. Can these deep internal reforms be enough to build an economy that's truly resilient to whatever shocks the world throws at it next?
Hey, if this explainer helped you make sense of the story behind the headlines, do us a favor and hit that like button, share it with someone, and definitely subscribe for more deep dives like this.
We genuinely love hearing from you. So if you have any feedback, or if there's a topic you're dying for us to break down next, just drop it in the comments below. Thanks for watching.